Hi, and welcome to the Data U Consistent Data session. My name is Stanley Chan, and I've been with Embarcadero for almost 10 years. 8 years in the technical support department, 4 years as a technical account manager, and over a year as a software consultant. I've worked with thousands of customers over the years answering questions and solving problems with the ER Studio. Today, I'm going to talk about consistent data and distributed systems. So what do I mean when I talk about consistent data? In this scenario, I'm talking about data that is accurate. Whether you look at it from one place or another, the number 42 will always be the number 42. Data is easy to transfer from one system to another. I don't have to worry about conversions or checks. I know that when I move or copy the data from one place to another, it will fit, and I don't have to worry about data being corrupt. So why do you need consistent data? Well, if the data doesn't fit on one server, this could be space limitations, performance, or any other number of reasons where you need to split up the data. Data is spread across multiple devices. Nowadays, some of our data is moved or copied to mobile devices. We want to make sure that the data there is also as accurate as the data in the original system. Backups. When we restore back data from a backup, whether it's a full restore or a partial restore, we need to make sure that the data fits and we don't accidentally leave anything out. So what happens if data is not consistent? Data movement takes longer. We need to have checks in place to make sure that the data will fit into the other system. If it doesn't, then we need to convert that data. And this incurs unnecessary overhead that could be avoided. So here's a very overly simplified example. We have two systems. System 1, we have an integer value. System 2, we have a character value. As you can see here, if the two systems aren't consistent, there needs to be some checks and conversions done here. Let's assume that it takes 500 milliseconds to check the data, and then another 500 milliseconds to convert the data from one to the other. This means that it will take an additional 1 second overhead time for each record to be transferred. To make this simple, we'll say we have 360,000 records. This will add an additional 10 hours of overhead time. What if we could reduce that by half? If we didn't have to do the conversions, then we could save us 500 milliseconds per record, which would be around 5 hours of overhead. In an ideal situation, we probably wouldn't even require the check either, but not all data is ever ideal, so you probably want to keep the check in place just in case. So what happens if data is not consistent? Data movement takes longer. Data corruption could occur. There could be a chance during the conversion process which the data could change. If I'm moving from a character to an integer, those don't always move consistently. So you have to change the character, convert it to an integer, and things there are not going to be proper. The reports on data elements are inconsistent. If the data doesn't fit, then you need to truncate the data, which could lead to inconsistencies in the data. So how can ER Studio help? One, we can help with keeping old versions. By keeping old versions, you'll always have something to reference back to. You'll know that the data entered. You'll know how the data was entered and determine the best way to move that data. You can keep old versions of the model in the repository. By storing old versions, you can always reference back to make sure that things are consistent. And I'll show you how to do this with the repository using the set name release. So I have ER Studio up. I have a model that's already in the repository. It's checked in. I've done some development work on it. I've done some testing. I made sure this production model is exactly what I want for my next version. So the first thing you want to do is you get the original version of the model. You go to the repository, you go to releases, and then you use set name release here. So what a set name release does is it creates a snapshot of what your diagram looks like at a very specific moment in time. So at this moment in time, this is the snapshot. What's going to happen is it's going to create the snapshot, and it'll be like a read-only version of this model. So you can look at it, you can run your compare, merge, generate DDL scripts, everything like that, but you won't be able to make any changes, which is great for versioning because you can look at it, but you won't be able to do anything. So if I expand this, I can see that I have two versions here with my GIM, my Global Investment Data Management Database. So I'm going to do short form for my diagram name and say this is version 3. So this is my production model. I'm going to create a version here. I can give my version description, maybe date it, explain what the changes are, if there are some major changes, things like that, just so you get an idea of what's happening here. So I create a name release. So there's an operation status window, what's happening. And once I've set the name release, I can then start transferring through a compare merge all of the changes that I've made in my development or in my test models. I can run them through a compare merge and merge those changes here into this new model. So now I have my old version, but what I see here now in this model would be my most up-to-date version. So if I go to repository, releases, I can do a get name release, and this will allow me to get any number of version, like older versions that I have. So I expand this GIMDB model. I know here I have version 1, 2, and 3. So I can get any one of these versions. I'll just grab version 2. Click OK here. And once I grab a named release, I can roll back my diagram to this named release. I can run a compare and merge against my current version, so I can generate reports of what the differences are and make sure the changes that I've made isn't going to break anything in my older version. So again, I can go to model. I can do compare to merge utility. That will generate a DDL script for you between this version and the latest version. I can go to repository and then releases. I can roll back my diagram to this name release. So if I've made some changes to my new production and I realized, okay, it's not what I was looking for, I can roll back my diagram to this name release. We don't delete name releases until you delete it yourself. So if I go back to my get name release, as you remember, I grabbed version 2. You'll see that we still have version 1, 2, and 3. So it's not incremental between version 1 and 2, like the differences between the two. Version 1 is a whole new snapshot. Version 2 is a whole new snapshot. So I can go back to version 1, see what the differences are between version 1 and 2, or maybe see what the differences are between 1 and 3. So I can go back any version, and the versions will always be there until I delete them. So that's how you would do it within ERStudio, to keep an old version so you have a set name release for you there. So that's keeping your old versions. You'll probably want to keep old versions of your data as well, but that's kind of out of the realm of ERStudio. ERStudio will help you keep old versions of the structure of the data model. ERStudio can also help in making sure that all data objects are consistent. You want to make sure that you minimize the number of data conversions. And to do this, you want to track the data types from one system to another and make sure that they are all the same wherever possible. You can utilize an enterprise-wide data dictionary, which makes sure that your reusable objects, including columns, are consistent. And I'll show you how to do this using the Enterprise Data Dictionary in the repository. So again, I'm coming back to my ERStudio Data Architect. There's a couple of ways to start off with your Enterprise Data Dictionary. So if you don't have one, what I recommend is if you have a database that you want to base it on, so you have a couple of columns that you are going to be using throughout different data models, what you can do is if you go to File, New, and we'll reverse engineer an existing database. So I'm just going to do a SQL Server database. It's what I have available for me. Choose my database, my owner, just use my user tables here. Hit next. So what I'm going to do here is infer domains. So this will create a domain for each of my column. And a domain within ERStudio is just a reusable column in our data dictionary. And again, our data dictionary is just a list of reusable objects. So I'm going to infer the domains here. Hit next. And finish. And this will go through the process of reverse engineering my database and creating the domains in my data dictionary. So a domain can be bound to multiple tables. So I come back to my data dictionary down below. You'll see that I have a bunch of domains here, and all these domains represent a column that I have in my database. So this will give me a great starting point I can start building off of. I can delete these domains, I can add more domains if I want. I can group them if I want to do that. So I can right click, I can do new domain folder, and this will allow me to group domains so that they are easier to find. You know, how they're all related. Maybe you want to group them in a folder so you know that all these domains are part of a specific type of entity or type of table, that sort of thing. You can also do view domain bindings here. So if I do view domain bindings, I can see where this domain is bound to within this data model. So I know, okay, this one's only bound to the customer table, both on the logical and physical side, and the account number column. If I go to another one, you'll see that there's sales order header and vendor table, and the account number. Another good thing with reverse engineering, and this is a little bit off topic a little bit, but you can see if there's any duplicates, and from here, you can condense them into one, and make sure that you have one specific domain. So once you've created your domains, we can go up here, we can create attachments. We can also do data security information. Attachments are just additional information that you can add about your data model. So if I go to my VentureWorks here, this is a VentureWorks data model, comes packaged with the Studio, and I'll give you a good idea of. We have a couple of data dictionaries here, so you can take a look at it. So attachments, your design stewards, executive stewards, quality stewards. So if you double click on one, you can see the name, the description, the value. We have all these different values. You can do text list. Text list, is just a possible values. Text is anything you want to put in there. External file path, so just references of file. So these are all things that you can make sure that are consistent amongst your different data models. So your design steward, you might want to make sure that this user is a design steward in models in my VentureWorks and also in my GimDB. And using an enterprise data dictionary, this will help you do that. We also have data security information. If you right click, you can do generate default security information. And again, more information to describe your data model and your objects, and then they can be consistent amongst your different data models. And anything you create here, we're going to create a couple of attachments just for a starting point. Create a couple of attachments, create a couple of domains. And I have come back to my model, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to repository, diagram, and add a diagram. So I'm going to add this to my repository. So I give my diagram a name. So I'm just going to do, say, reverse model. And I can add it to a project if I wanted to. If I had any existing enterprise data dictionary, at this point I can bind my enterprise data dictionary to this model. But I'm going to show you how to promote your local data dictionary into an enterprise data dictionary. So I'm going to check this box, and this will promote my local data dictionary into an enterprise data dictionary. I give my enterprise data dictionary name, and then a description. So click OK. So now I have an enterprise data dictionary, and this is just diagram properties. So click OK, and this will add my diagram to the repository. So with your enterprise data dictionary, all objects that you create here, and if you bind it to different models, those changes will get applied to all those different models. So it's a great way just to make sure that your domain, your account number, for example, domain is consistent amongst your VentureWorks, your GimDB, my reverse engineered model here. And they're always the same. If I wanted to make a change to it, maybe add a note, definition, change the data type, I make those changes in my enterprise data dictionary, all those changes get applied to it. So if you take a look here in this model, we have two data dictionaries. The first one will always be just a local data dictionary tied to this specific model, and then we have our enterprise data dictionary, which is tied to multiple models. If I go to repository data dictionary and do enterprise data dictionary bindings, you can see all the enterprise data dictionaries that I have in this data model. If I click on one, I can see what diagram it's bound to, what file name. If I expand it, I can see all the objects that are in this data dictionary. And if I click on a specific one, I can see exactly which diagram, which model, entity table, and the attribute column. And then from here, I can export the result to a CSV file. So if I wanted to change the data type of this, I can see how it's going to impact all those different models that are bound to this that's using this enterprise data dictionary object, and make sure it's not going to break anything. So this is a way to make sure that your data objects are all consistent. If I do change it, how is it going to affect things? Will I have to do any conversions? Will I have to do any checks? If I change it from if I just expand my data type from the width or the scale from like 10 to 20, it's probably not going to make any differences. Everything's probably still going to fit, and there's probably no any problems. But this is a way to see how it's going to affect all your different data models and how it's going to affect all those different objects. So your enterprise data dictionaries, this will help you make sure that all your data objects are consistent. And the last way here so you can help is map data movement. By mapping how your data is moving, you can see where the data is coming from and where it's going to. You can see whether the data will fit from one system to another. You can also track the transformation to make sure that the data. You can also track the transformations that may be happening to the data to make sure that the data ends up where you want it and in the way that you want it. So if I come back to the end to Ear Studio and close this off, and I take a look at my AdventureWorks again. Down on the bottom left, I have a data lineage. So this is your visual data lineage that shows you visually where the data is coming from, if there are any transformations, and where the data is going to. So this is a very simplified example. Your data sources here, your local models, these are just the models, objects that you have in your local model. Your other sources would be your target or maybe your source tables that are coming into this local model. They can be other DM1 files that you can bring over. They can reverse engineer a database and bring those over as table objects. If it's a file like an Excel spreadsheet or some kind of file system, you can still represent those objects as tables, and then you can see what's happening here. So if I go to other sources, I can import source, and you can see, this is just like a reverse engineering process. If I right click and do new source, you have the ability to have like a flat file, and have information, details, logical, some details about that, other, and you can add some connectivity properties, and so you get an idea. You can pretty much bring in anything and use it as a source, as a data source. Once you have those objects in, all you have to do is click and drag. You bring that object over, and then from here you have your transformations up here. You can create your transformations, and then you have your data stream. So you click that. So you can go from source to target, transformation to your target. And if I double click on the transformation, you get an idea of what your input columns are and what your output columns are. And then from here you can see your data types. You can make sure that the data types match between your inputs and the outputs. If they don't, then you might want to, then you have to worry about conversions. And if it's something that's in progress, then you can make sure that those data types are converted properly so that the data will fit from the inputs and the outputs, so you don't have to worry about conversions and incurring overhead time. And then you have your definitions, which just gives you like a business definition for describing what's happening, so that everybody can read it and understand it. And then the code, which is the code itself to move the data from one to another. So this is just a very simple data lineage here. If I take a look at my the second another data flow, you can see some more details here, which is a little bit more complicated. You have a couple transformations, you have a few sources, more transformations, and then it goes into like 2 tables. So there's some differences here. And you can add more transformations, so you can make this 3 or 4 levels if you wanted to do that. So it's very simple just to create your own data flow, so you get an idea of where it's coming from and where it's going to. And with your data lineage and your enterprise data dictionary, we have the ability to go to Tools, Generate Reports. And this will allow you to generate reports on your data lineage. You can see what's happening, pass that around to your other users so they get a good idea of what's happening. If you have the web portal, the team server portion, this will be all published on a web portal, which you can pass links around, and people will be able to log in, see what the differences are, see what the transformations are, generate reports on enterprise data dictionaries and things like that. So to go back as a summary, how can ER Studio help? You can keep old versions, use the naming the set name release to keep old versions of your data model, just to make sure you have something to reference back to and make sure that the data will be able to move from one to the other without too many problems. Making sure that all data objects are consistent. So if you have a couple of databases, one on a server, one on a mobile device, make sure that those data objects are the same, so that when you do move the data from one to another, it's not going to cause any problems. You're not going to have to do any conversions. You don't have to truncate data, things like that. And make sure that all the data is the same, is accurate from your server and the mobile device. And then you map your data movement, which will help you with the previous point in making sure the data objects are consistent. You can see where the data is coming from, where it's going to. You can see what the data types are, and make sure that they're all the same. So I'd like to thank you for attending the session. Hopefully I helped you understanding how ER Studio can help you with maintaining data consistency amongst distributed systems. You can learn more about ER Studio product family here. Here's a link to that. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you again.
So Jolene put a question. She said, is there anyone in the audience who doesn't know the 42 reference? And Joyce replied, hopefully everyone has read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, and you'll know the 42, the answer to everything in the universe. James asked if you're, and both Stanley and Ron replied, if you're modeling at the enterprise level, what are suggestions for when the system DBA developer insists that their application has to convert your integer to a character? You want to sort of reply again, Stanley? I know the answer is in the Q&A log, but making a data type change, right?
Yeah, for that one,
uh-oh, maybe you have to turn off your speaker.
Right, for that one, I think the best thing to do is just to get some. So this is a converting integer, insisting the DBA developer insisting to convert your integer to character. I think you just have to more detail as to why.
Stanley would ask why they need to have a database change. By better understanding the reasons, you can make a better case to not change or leave as is. Depending on the amount of data being transferred at one time, it might be a good idea to determine how long it takes to transfer the data and help you build your case for not making the change. And Ron answered, it comes down to who owns and enforces the enterprise model.
The problem with who owns the enterprise model, of course, quite often comes down to, unfortunately, politics and personalities. So, it's a human question that can be very difficult to answer. There needs to be some type of governance, though, to have a decision-making process for who actually owns and enforces, what the data types will be at an enterprise level. That said, you're often going to have ERP solutions and other systems that come into play where you will have no choice but to transform the data when you're interfacing between those different systems, because all the data definitions aren't owned in-house.
So the next question that shows up is from Alf, and it says, what about the data in the database when you do updates in ER Studio? Would the data in the base also be checked and versioned, or is that up to the user to back up? I think both of you answered, but Ron, maybe you can share your answer.
Yeah, basically, ER Studio itself is at the model and metadata level, and there's typically a change management process to deploy those changes out to the databases themselves. So what you would typically do is you can actually compare the models, and you can actually generate the DDL for the difference between them, as an example, as a net change script that your DBAs would typically apply to the database. The updates themselves are typically in the DBA's hands, so they would be looking after the practices of making sure that the databases are correctly backed up before applying any significant changes. They would apply the scripts and that type of thing. And depending on your environment, if it's production, obviously you would really want to have that control, but if you're in an environment where you're still doing development and testing, these scripts can be checked in, like any other source, into your automated build systems to deploy those changes as well. It's generally just running the DDL just like it's running any other type of source code in those types of environments. And of course, to actually manage the database systems themselves, that really falls into the hands of the database tools, which are the subject of tomorrow's sessions.
Great, thanks, Ron. Next question from Alf. Since Oracle is not using integers but BCD for all numeric data, data loss could occur if transferring to and from a database using integers instead of BCD. How would you minimize the potential harm of data loss?
Yeah, I think you just need to make sure. I mean, I don't have a full understanding of the BCD, what that is, but I think you just want to make sure that, wherever possible, the data types match up.
Yeah, generally speaking, whether you're using ETL tools or interfaces or views from one brand of database into another one, you just need to ensure that the database, the source and target data types that you're utilizing are compatible. And particularly in certain instances, you'll have to make sure that you transform the data correctly, putting into the target system. Having said that, I've worked in environments where we've had all flavors of databases, DB2, SQL Server, Oracle, and others, and I won't say that it's not a problem, but it's just something that needs to be taken care of with quite a bit of discipline on the development side of things when you're actually moving the data itself.
Okay, so definitely need to take care in that kind of environment.
Yeah,
okay, next
most
question
of the transformation tools will do it. So,
okay. Excellent. Jeff asks, is there a limit to how many domains can be created in an enterprise data dictionary? And does it take longer to open a diagram if you have tens of thousands of domains? Stan, I think you said there's no limit that you know of. It's not a constraint in the tool.
Yeah, there's no limit that I know of. I haven't worked with tens of thousands of domains, but I'm sure you could probably do it. I don't think there's really any limits to that, but the more you have, the more it takes to load up. So with tens of thousands, I mean, will take a little bit longer than if you just had like 100 or 200 domains.
Joel has asked, can you please explain creating a version with setting name set verses with branching? I can create a new version with branching as well, if I'm not mistaken. So what are the advantages of one versus the other?
For this one, naming standards just creates like a snapshot, so it's like a read-only version. Most of the people that I work with for the branch and merge, I mean, use that if you want to create a copy of your diagram for to use somewhere else. So if you had like a development section and then development model, you want to copy that so you have like a test model and then the production model. You can use a branch and merge functionality there to branch your copy so that you have multiple copies, so you can use those. And then you can use the naming, like the set name release, the name releases, to create like a read-only version in those branches. So you can use both. Just the branch merge just gives you more ability. It creates a copy so you can make changes to it, and then the name release just creates like a snapshot, so you can't make any changes to it. So you can use both at the same time. It's really up to you how you want to use it.
Great, thanks, Stan. Lindsay asks, the lineage feature, does that only work if the logic is performed in the database layer? Or can I create them for a non-database layer of ETL code?
I'm assuming that you want to reference like a flat file or something like that. You can definitely do that. We can represent a flat file as, if you can represent the flat file as like a database and a table, or like an Excel, some kind of Excel spreadsheet or something like that. You can definitely do that. Just create like a data source that references that file that creates like a table that represents a table, and then you can show that in the data lineage, so you can see where the source and the targets are and any transformations.
Great.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. When I
James
read the
asked, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it looks like the way the question's being asked is it's assuming that the data lineage diagram is actually generating the ETL code, which is not the case. It's the other way around. It's mapping out what the transformations look like, and you can actually tie the data lineage portion of the tool into things like SQL Server information services to actually pull that information into the tool to show what the ETL mappings were, but it's not pushing it forward engineering it into an actual ETL routines.
Next question, James says that, Stan, you mentioned code to move the data. Is this tool friendly with different flavors of SQL, for example, Oracle, Microsoft Access, etc.? Ron, I think you had an answer for that.
Yes, generally speaking, like the Enterprise Edition supports many of the different database platforms, Oracle, SQL Server, MySQL, and many others. But there are also licensing options for smaller database packs as well, so that way organizations don't need to have the full support for databases that they're not going to use. Yeah. But I've used it in environments with many different back-end databases with logical subject areas and different physical targets in the physical layers. Right.
So the short answer is yes, ER Studio works with a variety of database offerings, and the products are available. Some of the products are available in single platform or multi-platform versions, depending on your environment. Okay, next question from Lindsay. Do the domains have a maximum length on name? Can you enforce such business rules?
There is no limit that I know of. So I don't think there is a limit. To enforce that, I think for the domain name itself, I mean, you could probably create a macro that allow you to enforce that just to check on the length and stuff like that. As for other checks, I'm not sure. I'd have to look into that.
All right, thanks, Stan. The next question from Cheryl is, does the mapping of the data movement generate ETL code as well for that mapping?
Yeah, that was covered in my earlier answers, that it doesn't forward engineer and actually generate the ETL code, but it will reverse engineer ETL like SSIS to actually help you create the diagrams in the tool.
Okay, from the ETL. Okay. All right, so the next question from Tariq is, lineage information is normally part of ETL tools such as Informatica. How can we keep the information consistent between Informatica and ER Studio? Ron, is that an area where our MetaWizard bridges comes in handy?
I'm not sure if the MetaWizard actually works in those with that particular platform, so we're going to have to look into that one. Okay. Oh, you got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Dan, it does. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So we can import from Informatica. I think it's Power Center. So we can import that into your Studio, and it'll create the data lineage information for you. So you just import it, and you can run like a compare and merge just to merge the changes and things like that, or just bring it over.
Next question from Raghav is, how can we save customized index name or table name in the desired file format? It always gives a SQL set of files. Does that make sense? I'm not sure I understand that question.
Yeah, I'm having a little trouble understanding it as well, because of course if you actually have the indexes and table names in your physical layer of the model, it will utilize those when it's generating DDL. I'm wondering if it's relating to the fact that when you generate the DDL, it makes it a .SQL script that comes out of the tool. But you could rename the extensions if you needed to.
All right, thank you. Next question from Jolene is, what is actually meant by the term domain?
So in ER Studio, a domain is just a reusable column. So in our data dictionary, it's just a list of reusable objects. So within that, the data dictionary for reusable objects, the domain is just a reusable column. So you can take that column and use it in multiple tables and entities.
Okay, great. Let's see. Does the data lineage generate anything like an ETL process? I think we've answered that and said you can partly do that. Ron, maybe you can clarify that for me again. If not, and it is only documentation, why do it? Informatica tells the data lineage.
Uh, the reason for doing it would be, and it is correct that it does map it out, you know, in terms of showing what it is in the modeling tool itself. But the important part is that then that is part of the model metadata, so you can relate it back to the entities in your enterprise model as well, so you know what's participating in the different ETLs.
Okay, great, thanks. Cart has asked, storing multiple versions of models make the repository huge and unwieldy. What is the recommended best practice?
So I think for this, we don't, for the repository, I mean, we don't create a version every time you check in some changes. So those versions are created every time you do a set name release. So it's really just setting your name release and then making sure you don't exceed like a certain amount, and then you can always delete them whenever you want to. I have worked with customers who create macros that will go through the process of setting a name release every, like on a weekly basis, maybe on a monthly basis, and then just deleting a version if it gets, you know, to a certain amount of time.
Okay, so that would be some manual control in terms of age of models, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Jolene sent a clarifying question. Is the term data intended to refer to data sources? Sorry, is the term domain intended to refer to data sources? They use the term domain to refer to the sort of data stored in columns. A domain would be text, integer, code, etc. An organization with thousands of domains is a very scary thought.
I can take that one if you like. Yeah, the more common term for text integer is typically data types. Domains are typically more specific than that. For example, you might have a domain called address line. So anywhere that you're using addresses, if you reference those columns to an underlying domain of address line, then you would ensure that your data type was consistent across all the different places that you were using it.
Okay, great. Jolene also asked, can we use ER Studio to model and reference the golden records for enterprise data? I'm not sure what gold is. That like your gold model, basically? Or
yeah, your gold copy. And what that really ties into is knowing you can use ER Studio for it, and there are multiple approaches to do that. It's really tying it into your subject areas and your models in terms of defining what the gold copy is for different pieces of information. Now, if it's a very complex environment, if you can also use metadata tagging within the tool, so you could set up something like an attachment, and you could say that on a particular entity in a particular subject area, you could just have a metadata tag to indicate whether it was flagging that was the actual gold copy as the source as it moves through the different systems.
Okay, great, thanks. Craig asked, during the demo, Stan showed an enterprise and a local dictionary. If there is a conflict between these, which one takes precedence or overrides the other?
I don't think it's not possible to have conflicts. If you have two objects in the domain in the data dictionary that are the same in the logical and in the local and in the enterprise, you have the choice to use one or the other. So they don't really conflict with each other. You do have the choice whether you use the local data dictionary object or the enterprise data dictionary object.
So if you want to keep those synchronized up, how would you do that to make an update in one and reflect it in the other?
You'd have to I think I'm not sure how to what the easiest way to be to update your enterprise from your local. I think there's probably a couple of macros that you could do that, or you could export or I think like export or copy the local data dictionary information into the enterprise data dictionary.
Okay, thanks. Back to the lineage topic. What if the ETL code is performed in, say, Java versus a data view or trigger or database object? Would I still need to represent this as a database object for this product?
I think what's happening there is if you want to map the data lineage in ER Studio, take your source tables and your target tables, and you would want those to be objects within the model itself. You can then go into the data lineage and actually specify what the transformations are, and just in the notes make notation to the fact that this is being done by a Java routine or something like that. The Java routine or ETL code itself is not represented in the model other than just in the transformation mappings. The implementation doesn't really matter for that.
Okay, great. Charles asked, can you reverse engineer the ETL lineage from Oracle, PL, or SQL procedures?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, they
We
can come
check
into the
on
model with stored procedures, but not the lineage, not the ETL specifically.
Okay, so this is not supported then?
No.
Okay. All right, next question from Mark. Further to the data lineage question, a lot of questions on data lineage. Could this data lineage be used to represent the mapping through XML type objects?
I think, again, I mean, if you can represent that XML as a table, you can, if I'm understanding the question correctly, if you can represent the XML as an object, a database object, you can definitely map that.
Okay. What about NoSQL databases and Hadoop?
Yes, we can import the Hadoop through the Meta Wizard. I think the NoSQL ones are coming up, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Would you briefly explain the functionality of the universal mapping function in ER Studio? ER Studio does not show all bindings to the Enterprise Data Dictionary if only one diagram is displayed. So is the universal mapping the solution to take care of that?
If I'm understanding, so you just want to show all the bindings to the Enterprise Data Dictionary. To do that, I think I showed that in the demo. If you go to the Enterprise Data Dictionary binding section, you'll see all the Enterprise Data Dictionaries that you have, and you select specific objects within the Enterprise Data Dictionary. You'll be able to see which diagram and object it's bound to, and then you can always export that as well.
I can add to that as well, Joy. The actual universal mappings, and actually I addressed this a little bit later in my presentation later on today as well, is particularly in environments where you've got a multiple back-end databases and systems that you're representing and pulling into an enterprise model. I found the universal mappings to be extremely important because, for instance, employee may be or employee name may be EMPL_NAM in one database. It may be something else in another database. And when you have those models in there, you can actually use the universal mappings to link them together. So that way, that will show you once you've gone through that universal mapping exercise, it will show you all the different manifestations of that attribute or concept.
Okay, thanks, Ron. Next question from Devorah. Does it reverse engineer DTS packages, the older version of SSIS?
I'd have to look into that. I don't believe so. I think we only support SSIS 2005 to 2012, so version 9 to 11.
Okay, we can follow up on that one then. What about documenting MDM type solutions with third-party applications and various DB platforms?
I would need a little more to see what they're driving on in that particular question.
Okay, Jill, maybe you can ask again and give us a little bit more detail to work with. Palani Kumar has asked, does ER Studio have connectors for all major vendors like Teradata, SAP, IBM tool suites? I believe our MetaWizard tool covers that, all those.
The Teradata you can connect through ODBC connections. With the SAP, IBM tool suites, that's all through the MetaWizard.
Okay, Mark has asked, boy, a long question. This question relates to consistency when a large model is split into multiple files or DM1s. Rather than having one huge model, we would like to isolate our master data entities to a separate MD model DM1 that all the other models could reference. Kind of like having a virtual entity that links back to the MD object in the MD model DM1. We would prefer not to copy those MD entities to the other diagrams where they're used, as they could get out of sync and would otherwise require a mechanism to keep it in sync. What method would accomplish this, and how could consistency of the MD entity be ensured if it is used in several model files?
There are multiple approaches. One would be to have a model, for those master data objects, like he says, but then you could copy them into the other models for reference, but then you'd want to make sure that you're syncing across those different models. I think what he's really looking for is an absolute true virtualization of that, which is a little more difficult. Another way around it, there's various different ways to approach this, but if you want all of the attributes and everything reflected in all the different models that it's using, then the way would be to maintain a master model and actually synchronize those into the other models. Otherwise, you could just represent them conceptually, like as a conceptual entity, and then through the universal mappings, you could tie them back and say these are all the manifestations of that concept. But to use them, you're going to have to replicate them, because I'm assuming you would want to reference them with relationships and have the foreign keys and everything propagate into the referenced entities as well.
Okay, I captured a little bit of that in the response, but maybe you could elaborate more in the official Q&A answers.
That would actually take a really, that's a subject
that'd be a pretty
discussion.
Pretty good discussion.
Yeah.
And we would be happy to set up some time with you, Mark, if we wanted to do a more detailed discussion one-on-one on that type of topic. Okay, Janet has commented that she would never expect there to be thousands of domains for an enterprise. So does that come back to the difference between a domain and a data type?
I would think so. Yeah. It depends on the amount of rigor that you really want to enforce with those domains. I've been in huge development projects where we were very rigorous about that, and we wanted to make sure that we set up the domains first, and any tables, and again I'll use the address example or even name examples or whatever, it would reference back to those domains so that we guaranteed absolute consistency in the data types.
Mark had another question. Can data lineage be exported to a source to target two-dimensional workbook? It would be handy if some analysts could have the data lineage available in a workbook instead of having to navigate through the ER Studio GUI.
Yeah, we have a couple of macros that allow you to export the data lineage into like a Excel spreadsheet.
Ray says, I have 3,700 domains in my repository and have never had a problem with opening models. So I think that goes back to the question earlier of, would you have a performance issue? And sounds like he's not having one at all, so that's great.
Yep.
All right. Jolene says, we use data type as the actual physical implementation of the information. So I think that ties back to Jolene's question earlier about data types versus domains.
Yeah. And a domain has a data type associated to it in a particular physical implementation.
Okay. So I'm not sure if that gives her more clarity on.
There's actually two in the data dictionary. There's two sections. There's one for the user data types, which I think is what you'd be using. Is actually I think what Julian's using, and then the domains is what I was talking about, which just represents like the whole column, which includes the data type itself.
In ER Studio, does it support nested domains and subdomains?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Great. I like easy answers. Alf says metadata is mostly stored as Word or Excel file. Is it possible also to store as a CVS so it is versionable in, for example, Subversion?
I think he means CSV.
CSV, yeah, comma delimited file.
Always put it to Excel and then have Excel save it to CSV file.
Okay.
And just a note, Joyce and everyone, we're coming up at the top of the hour, but there's only a couple of questions left. So
okay, let's see if we can finish these last couple of questions. No break this time. Can XSDs be used as data sources?
Through the Meta Wizard, you can import XSD, so you can bring the XSD right into Data Architect. Do
we have any plans of creating a separate session only on data lineage? Vijay, that is something we can certainly follow up with you on. We have one of our software consultants that can do a demo specifically for you or address other questions that you might have, but I don't think we have a topic planned for this particular conference this time. Okay, is data mapping equivalent to universal mapping?
If we're talking about the mapping depicted in the lineage diagrams, no, universal mapping is yet another technique within the model.
And the last question I show is, does Embarcadero have a standard set of domains that can be the starting point for my enterprise model? Would those be available in our UDMs?
Some of the UDMs have them. If you take a look at our sample models as well, that's packaged with the ERCD, we have a couple of sample models with data dictionaries that kind of start you off as well. I think the AdventureWorks and the GIMP DM1 files, I think those ones are probably a good starting point.
Yeah, and the ones you want may, there's some factor of being industry specific as well. So depending on the industry you're in, that there may be a certain set that you want to make sure that you have set up as well.
All right, I think that wraps us up for this session. Thank you so much.